The wedding photos still hung in the hallway, framed in gold, polished until they gleamed beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. Daniel liked to stop there sometimes, his eyes lingering on the way Clara leaned into him, veil brushing against his cheek, her smile perfectly captured as though it belonged to him forever. To any visitor, it was the portrait of devotion. To Daniel, it was proof that he had won. He often replayed that day in his head, not the ceremony, not the vows, but the moment she said yes. He had seen doubt flicker in her eyes, barely noticeable to anyone else, but he caught it. He always caught everything when it came to Clara. The house echoed that same illusion of perfection. White curtains, freshly cut roses on the table, expensive china that never seemed to be used. Daniel told himself it meant stability, that their marriage stood untouched by chaos. But when he looked closely, when the wine glasses caught the dim kitchen light, he sometimes saw faint cracks at the edges. Clara had her own way of keeping distance, of being present without being present. She laughed at the right moments, touched his arm when guests were watching, kissed him with precision. Yet in private, her silences carried weight. Daniel often studied her when she wasn't aware, convinced that if he stared long enough, he could unlock whatever she was hiding. He needed to believe that she loved him the way he loved her, fully, fiercely, without condition. But love, Daniel knew, could be a possession too. The thought crept in during sleepless nights when Clara turned her back to him. He would lie awake, imagining her slipping away, her mind belonging to someone else. The idea was unbearable. If marriage was a pact, then she was bound to him as surely as he was bound to her. He would make sure of it. Neighbors admired them. Friends envied them. On Sundays, when they strolled through the garden hand in hand, the illusion was complete. Clara wore her summer dress. Daniel kept his hand at her waist, and together they looked untouchable. But behind Clara's faint smile there was something unreadable. Daniel sensed it, though he told himself it was nothing. Still, when her eyes lingered on the horizon a little too long, he wondered, was she dreaming of another life? Another man? Or something darker? The question gnawed at him silently, as he tightened his grip around her hand, smiling for the neighbors. Clara smiled back, but her eyes gave nothing away, and in the quiet distance between them, shadows began to form. Clara had a way of entering a room without sound. Daniel often said it was like she glided rather than walked, her presence filling the air before her footsteps ever touched the floor. She was elegance sharpened into form, the kind of woman people noticed but could never fully read. To Daniel, she was an enigma he was desperate to own, though sometimes he wondered if she allowed herself to be possessed at all. At dinner, they played their roles. Clara lit the candles, smoothed her dress, poured the wine with a practiced grace. To anyone else, she would have seemed devoted, attentive. Yet Daniel noticed her subtle distance, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, the faint sigh when he spoke of work, the stiffness in her shoulders when he touched her hand. "You've been spending more again," he said one evening, watching her cut into the roast chicken with delicate precision. "It's my money too," Clara replied softly, but the edge beneath her voice was unmistakable. His jaw tightened. "We agreed to save. You know that." She lifted her gaze then, calm and cold. "We agreed to many things, Daniel. Not all of them suit me anymore." The words lingered in the air, sharper than the knife in her hand. Daniel forced a smile, but the seed of doubt pressed deeper into him. Later, when the house lay in silence and the wine dulled the edges of their tension, they found themselves lying side by side in bed. The lamp cast a dim circle of light, painting Clara's profile in warm golds and shadowed blues. "Sometimes I think people try too hard to get between us," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with resentment he couldn't entirely hide. Clara didn't turn her head. Her voice was low, almost a murmur. "And what if we just removed them?" Daniel's breath caught. He wasn't sure if she meant it. It sounded like a joke, but her tone was too steady, too measured. "Removed?" he asked, his throat dry. She finally looked at him, her eyes gleaming with something that unsettled him. "Yes, the world is simpler without distractions, without obstacles." He stared at her, trying to read the layers beneath her words. Was she testing him? Teasing him? Or did she truly mean what she said? "People would notice," he said carefully. Not if we're clever. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile that was neither warm nor playful. The silence stretched, thick and intoxicating. Daniel shifted closer, his hand brushing against hers. He wanted to believe it was just dark fantasy, a private game between husband and wife. Yet deep inside, he felt the pulse of something heavier, the spark of a pact not yet spoken aloud, but already binding them together. Clara closed her eyes and turned away, leaving him with the weight of her words echoing in his skull. And for the first time, Daniel wondered what his wife might be capable of. The whispers of the night still lingered in Daniel's mind when the first real test came. He hadn't expected it to happen so suddenly, hadn't imagined that Clara's cryptic fantasies would find flesh so quickly. But fate, or perhaps Clara herself, delivered it at their doorstep. It began with a knock on the door one gray afternoon. Daniel was in the study sorting through bills when he heard Clara's sharp intake of breath from the hallway. By the time he stepped out, a man stood framed in the doorway. Tall, rugged, eyes burning with a history Daniel didn't know. "Clara," the man said, voice low but charged. "We need to talk." The name that followed froze Daniel in place. Elliot. He had heard the name before, spoken only once, long ago in a moment of Clara's weakness. A ghost of her past, an old flame. Now the ghost had returned, alive and uninvited. Clara's composure wavered for only a second before she stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Daniel pressed against the frame, straining to hear, his pulse thundering in his ears. "You disappeared," Elliot said, his voice rising. "No word, no goodbye. I loved you, Clara. You don't just erase people like that." Her reply was colder, clipped, that life is over. "You shouldn't have come here." The tension snapped when Daniel pushed the door open, unable to hold back. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Elliot's eyes flicked to him, filled with contempt. The man she really wanted before she settled for this. The words sliced deeper than Daniel expected. He felt heat rush to his face, his fists clenching. Clara's silence behind him was worse than the insult itself. The shouting escalated. Elliot stepped forward, too close, spitting accusations. Of lies, of betrayal, of love unfinished. Daniel barely remembered the exact moment his hand reached for the heavy glass paperweight from the hallway table. It felt sudden, yet inevitable. The sound of impact was sickening. Elliot's body crumpled, his skull cracked against the floorboards. Silence followed, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing. He looked to Clara, expecting horror, screams, tears. But Clara only stared at the body, her face unreadable. Then slowly she met his gaze. "We don't have much time," she said. No blame, no panic, only calculation. Together they dragged Elliot's body through the back door, the evening sky closing in around them. The soil behind the rose garden, still soft from recent rain, swallowed him piece by piece. Daniel's hands trembled as he covered the grave, his chest heaving. Clara knelt beside him, her dress streaked with dirt, her breathing steady. When it was done, they stood side by side in silence. The weight between them was heavier than any vow they had ever spoken. There was no undoing what they had buried, not just the body, but the moment itself. Daniel looked at Clara, waiting for words, for anything. She slipped her hand into his, cold and firm, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. In that silence, darker than any promise, the pact was born. The soil of the rose garden had barely settled when Clara's past began to surface, unbidden, like whispers rising from the grave they had dug. Daniel noticed it in fragments, the way her hands lingered in the dirt longer than his, the faraway look in her eyes when silence filled the room. To him it felt as though she had done this before, not the act itself, but the quiet surrender to inevitability. Clara never spoke much of her childhood. The little Daniel knew came in slivers. A father who vanished when she was 7, a mother who remarried and forgot her, nights spent listening to strangers arguing through thin walls. She had learned early that affection was a currency, and survival came from knowing when to withhold it. Daniel mistook her control for grace, her restraint for elegance. Only now did he begin to sense the truth, that Clara's calm was forged in abandonment, and power was the only thing she trusted. Daniel, by contrast, felt unmoored. The weight of Elliot's body still pressed on his chest when he closed his eyes at night. He woke in cold sweats, the image of blood pooling on the floor returning again and again. Clara never flinched. Instead, she moved through their days with a newfound clarity, as if one obstacle had simply been cleared from her path. "Do you regret it?" he asked her once late in the kitchen, his voice low. She didn't look up from the glass she was drying. "Do you?" He hesitated. That was enough for her to smile faintly, as though she had expected his weakness. The silence that followed made him feel smaller than ever. It was Clara who decided the second time, a colleague from her past, someone who had threatened to expose debts she'd hidden, a man who had leverage she would never allow. She laid it out as simply as a grocery list, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on him. "He'll ruin us," she said. "Unless we ruin him first." Daniel resisted at first, but her words clung to him like chains. She reminded him of Elliot, reminded him of the grave that already tied them together. If one secret bound them, why not two? The second victim came easier, though the ease frightened Daniel more than the act itself. This time, Clara guided him, her hands steady, her instructions calm. She knew where to go, how to wait, when to strike. He realized then that she wasn't following him into darkness. He was following her. Afterward, when the night was silent once more, Daniel studied Clara as she washed the blood from her hands. She looked serene, almost radiant, as though this was the life she'd been waiting for. Daniel felt both bound to her and terrified of her. Blood tied them now, not the blood of kin, but of strangers buried beneath their secrets. And Clara, he realized, would never let those ties break. The house smelled faintly of wax and smoke. Clara had insisted on candles that night, dozens of them lined across the dining table and windowsill, their flames flickering like watchful eyes. Daniel sat across from her, hands folded tight as though the glow might burn through the guilt buried in his chest. Two bodies now. Two graves, and still she looked untouched. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Clara's gaze lingered on the flame of a tall candle, her expression unreadable. "No, do you?" He swallowed. "Every night." A small, almost pitying smile curved her lips. "That's because you're still holding on to the wrong idea of what we've done." His brow furrowed. "The wrong idea?" Clara leaned forward, her face illuminated in gold, eyes dark pools in the light. "You think it's about death, about guilt. But it isn't, it's about us. We've done something no one else could understand. We're bound, Daniel. More than we were on our wedding day." Daniel shifted uneasily. "Bound by what? By lies, by blood?" "Yes," she said firmly, her tone carrying a dangerous softness. "Exactly that. Blood is stronger than vows, stronger than rings. Those people are gone, but we remain. We chose each other even in this." The words slithered into him, twisting guilt into something almost sacred. Yet he resisted, clinging to his own fear. "It wasn't a choice, Clara. Elliot. It just happened." And the second, her voice cut him off, sharp but calm. "You helped me. Don't pretend you were dragged. You buried them with your own hands." Daniel stared at her, heat rising in his chest. "Because I love you. Because I thought, then that's all that matters," she interrupted again, her tone softening like silk over steel. "Love is action, Daniel. Love is doing what must be done, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." The room thickened with silence. The candle flames bent in the draft, casting shadows across her face, making her look both angelic and sinister at once. "You think we can stop now?" Clara continued, her voice a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "We can't, we're too far in. If either of us breaks, the other falls. So we hold together, always." Daniel's breath hitched. "And if I can't?" Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. "Then you were never mine to begin with." The words gutted him. He wanted to deny them, but his chest ached with the truth. To walk away meant prison. To walk away meant losing Clara forever. Slowly, he reached across the table, his hand trembling as it met hers. She held him firmly, her touch cool and certain. "Say it," she whispered, his throat tightened. "We're bound." Clara's lips curved into a slow smile. "Now and forever." The pact, once silent, was spoken at last. And in that moment, Daniel felt the last of his freedom slip away, sealed beneath candlelight and Clara's unwavering gaze. The next weeks were filled with forced normalcy. Clara insisted on it. a return to appearances, to polished surfaces and perfect smiles. She planned small gatherings, arranged the garden, and filled their evenings with wine and laughter. To the outside world, the couple remained enviable, flawless in their suburban home. The neighbors loved them. Sunday barbecues brought families onto their lawn, the scent of grilled meat mingling with Clara's perfume. As she floated between conversations, Daniel stood beside her, drink in hand, laughing at jokes he barely heard. His mind buzzed with the memory of graves in the soil just a few feet away. Clara noticed his unease but never faltered. Her smile was steady, her gestures graceful, though her eyes carried a strain only Daniel could see. When she leaned in to kiss his cheek for the benefit of others, her lips felt rehearsed, her affection measured. Perfect hosts, one neighbor said, raising a glass. The kind of couple we all aspire to be. Daniel forced a laugh, though his chest tightened. If only they knew. It was during one of these evenings that suspicion quietly bloomed. A neighbor named Mrs. Collins lingered too long by the rose garden, her eyes narrowing at the uneven soil. Daniel watched her from the porch, his palms damp, convinced she could see through the dirt to the secrets buried beneath. Later, as the guests filtered out, Mrs. Collins paused at the door. "Lovely evening," she said, her smile polite but probing. "You've been doing some digging out back, haven't you? New project?" Clara's response was swift, her tone smooth. "Just replanting. Roses need fresh roots sometimes." The explanation was flawless, but Daniel caught the way Mrs. Collins studied them a moment longer before nodding. The door closed, leaving silence that felt heavier than the laughter that had filled the house minutes before. That night, Daniel paced the bedroom, his nerves fraying. "She knows," he muttered. She saw something. Clara, brushing her hair before the mirror, didn't turn. She saw nothing, and even if she did, suspicion isn't proof. He stopped pacing, staring at her reflection. "You're too calm." She met his eyes in the glass, her expression unreadable. "Because panic doesn't keep us safe, Daniel. Control does." Her words silenced him, but not his racing heart. As the neighborhood lights dimmed outside, he realized that their smiling facade was already cracking. One suspicious glance, one wrong word. That was all it would take, and Clara, calm as ever, seemed ready for it. The silence after Mrs. Collins's probing glance did not fade with the night. It clung to Daniel like a second skin. Every time he stepped into the garden, he felt her eyes on him, even when she wasn't there. Every word of praise from neighbors sounded laced with suspicion. Clara, however, moved through it with unshakable calm, her composure only deepening Daniel's unease. Inside the house, tension coiled tighter with every passing day. Clara carried herself like a queen in her domain, deciding when to entertain, when to remain withdrawn, when Daniel was allowed to brood, and when he must smile. She cloaked her dominance in the language of love, but Daniel began to feel the edge beneath it. One night, after too much wine, the weight of it all broke loose. He stood at the window, staring into the black outline of the rose garden, and muttered, "Sometimes I think you don't love me at all." Behind him, Clara's voice was cool, controlled. "If I didn't love you, Daniel, you wouldn't still be here." He turned sharply. "No, I'm still here because if I leave, I hang. If I walk away, it all comes out. That's not love, Clara, that's fear." Her eyes narrowed, reflecting the lamp's golden glow. "You think I forced you? That I dragged you into this? You didn't stop me," he snapped. "Not with Elliot. Not with the second. You wanted this. You wanted me trapped." She rose from her chair, her steps deliberate, each one pressing on him like a weight. When she stood before him, she touched his cheek with unsettling tenderness. "I gave you purpose. You were weak, Daniel, lost, I made you strong. And now you want to betray me with words like trapped?" His chest heaved. "Strong? I wake up every night hearing them. I can't breathe sometimes, Clara. That's not strength." Her hand dropped, her expression sharpening. "Then tell me, would you rather sit in a cell? Would you rather wear chains and let strangers decide your fate? Because if you walk away, that's what waits for you." The words struck like a blade, cold and undeniable. He felt his throat tighten, anger curdling into despair. "So that's it? Love or fear? You give me no choice." Clara tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's both, Daniel. That's what makes it unbreakable." The silence that followed was suffocating. He looked into her eyes and saw not softness but steel, not warmth but power. Their pact was not only blood, it was prison and bond, a cage built of both devotion and terror. Daniel lowered his gaze, defeated by her certainty. Clara, satisfied, turned back toward her chair, her shadow stretching long across the floor. He realized then that love had become indistinguishable from fear, and that Clara thrived on blurring the line. The argument faded, but the echo of Clara's words lingered, poisoning Daniel's thoughts. He told himself it would end there, that silence would protect them. But silence, he soon discovered, could be louder than any accusation. Mrs. Collins's curiosity did not wane. She lingered on the sidewalk too long, eyes drifting toward their garden. She asked questions twice, sometimes 3 times, as though she were testing the gaps in their answers. Her smile was tight, polite, but her gaze had a sharpness Daniel could no longer ignore. One evening, Clara leaned across the dinner table, her voice a velvet whisper. "She's becoming a problem." Daniel set his fork down. "She hasn't said anything. She's just nosy." Clara's lips curved in that knowing smile. "Nosy gets people killed." The word sent a chill crawling up his spine. He wanted to argue, to protest, but the quiet certainty in her tone reminded him of every step that had brought them here. By the time the night deepened, his fate was sealed. Though he could not name when the decision had been made, it was a Tuesday when Mrs. Collins vanished. The air was unnervingly still, the neighborhood wrapped in the kind of silence that seemed to listen. Daniel would never forget the muffled sounds, the hurried shuffle of feet on grass, the choked gasp swallowed by the night. He stood frozen near the back door, the shadows stretching around him, while Clara's hands moved with practiced calm. The scream never fully left Mrs. Collins's throat. Soil turned black beneath the shovel's weight, the earth swallowing the evidence grain by grain. Daniel's palms burned from gripping the handle, his muscles aching, but Clara's pace never faltered. She seemed almost alive in the ritual, her breath steady, her movements precise. When it was done, she smoothed the dirt with her bare hands, as though tucking the earth to bed. Daniel couldn't look at her. His vision blurred with flashes, blood across pale skin, eyes widening before dimming, voices that weren't there whispering through the trees. The silence afterward was unbearable, heavier than chains. Inside, he tried to wash the dirt from his skin, scrubbing until his arms were raw. But nothing removed the stain pressing against his mind. He stared into the bathroom mirror, searching for the man he had been, and found only hollow eyes staring back. Clara, by contrast, seemed reborn. She emerged from the shower humming softly, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. She poured herself a glass of wine and sipped it slowly, as though savoring victory. "We're untouchable now," she said, her voice glowing with satisfaction. Daniel's stomach churned. For the first time, remorse wrapped itself around him like a noose. He lay in bed that night wide-eyed, listening to Clara's calm breathing beside him, wondering if she had crossed into a place he could never follow. But he also knew one truth. Their bond was darker than ever. Sealed by another grave in their backyard, the neighborhood had never been quieter after Mrs. Collins disappeared. Curtains fluttered as residents whispered on porches, their eyes darting toward Daniel and Clara's house, with the unease of suspicion. It was only a matter of time before the knock came. A sharp rap on the door one late afternoon jolted Daniel's heart into his throat. He froze, the sound echoing through the hallway like a gunshot. Clara placed her wineglass down with deliberate calm, her expression unreadable. Detective Harris introduced himself first. Mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed little, his presence steady as stone. Behind him stood Detective Vega, younger, softer-spoken, but no less attentive. Their questions at first seemed routine, casual. "Have you seen Mrs. Collins recently? Did she mention any travel plans?" Clara answered with the poise of an actress. "She did talk about visiting her sister," she said smoothly, her smile warm. "Such a sweet woman, though. Sometimes forgetful." Daniel's throat constricted. He nodded too quickly, his palms damp. "Yes, forgetful," he echoed, though his voice cracked slightly. Harris's gaze flicked toward him for a moment too long, and Daniel swore he saw suspicion flicker there. The detectives didn't linger that day, but their absence left the house colder. Daniel slumped against the wall after they left, trembling. Clara, however, simply refilled her glass. "Relax," she murmured. "We gave them nothing." But Daniel could not relax. Each knock at the door, each ring of the phone sent him spiraling. Nights became endless loops of pacing and sweat-drenched sheets. Clara remained eerily composed, almost invigorated by the challenge. She rehearsed lies like lines of poetry, weaving details into a tapestry Daniel could never match. Days later, the detectives returned. This time their tone was sharper, their eyes narrowing on inconsistencies. Harris asked about the night Mrs. Collins vanished. Vega noted the faint smell of fresh soil in the backyard, though Clara deflected with a story about gardening. Daniel's breath hitched, and Harris noticed. "You seem nervous, Mr. Reed," he remarked casually. Daniel stammered, "No, just not used to police questions." Clara's hand touched his arm, squeezing with a warning he felt down to his bones. "My husband worries too much," she said lightly. "It's just his nature." The detectives exchanged a glance, then closed their notebooks. "We may have more questions soon," Harris said. When the door shut, Daniel turned on Clara, his voice low but frantic. "They don't believe us. I can't do this." "They know." Clara's eyes gleamed cold in the dim kitchen light. "Then you keep your mouth shut," she whispered. "Because if you don't, Daniel, we both burn." Her words tightened the noose around him. Every silence between them grew poisonous. Was she protecting him or herself? Was his trembling the biggest threat to their pact? Or was her calm manipulation the real danger? And for the first time, Daniel wondered which one of them would betray the other first. The interrogation room was cold, stripped of comfort. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound that gnawed at Daniel's nerves until he shook with it. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second dragging like an eternity. Detective Harris sat across from him, steady, patient, waiting. Vega leaned against the wall, arms folded, her silence deliberate. Daniel tried to hold his composure, but every inhale felt heavier, every beat of sweat louder. "Tell us where she is," Harris said at last. The words were calm, but the weight behind them pressed down like a stone. Daniel's lips parted. A sound escaped, half a word, half a sob. He shook his head violently, but the trembling betrayed him. He saw Clara's face in his mind, the way her eyes cut through him whenever his voice cracked. "Don't you dare," her gaze had always said. But Harris leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Daniel's secrets rot men from the inside. I see it eating you alive. You can't carry this much longer." The dam broke. Fragments slipped free. A name, a place, a night described in half-finished sentences. Daniel's hands clawed at the table as if begging it for forgiveness. He wept between words, choking out details of dirt, blood, and silence that would not stay buried. When the detectives finally pulled back, there was no triumph in their faces, only grim understanding. Across the hall, Clara sat perfectly composed. The light carved sharp edges into her features, but her eyes were pools of unreadable darkness. She had said almost nothing for hours, her stillness a shield. Questions bounced off her calm like stones skipping water. "Your husband is talking," Vega told her. Clara tilted her head slightly. "Daniel always talks," she murmured. Her tone was soft, almost pitying yet laced with venom. "He mistakes guilt for truth," but the detectives pressed, showing pieces of his confession. Dates, places, the neighbor. Clara's lips barely curved at the edges, but not into a smile, into something colder. As the hours stretched, the divide between husband and wife widened into an abyss. Daniel collapsed into despair, whispering apologies no one answered. Clara remained an enigma, her silence cutting deeper than any denial could. The room seemed to shrink around them both, time looping in agonizing circles, the clock's hands refusing mercy. 4 hours. That was all it took for their pact to unravel. 4 hours for Daniel's trembling devotion to dissolve into broken confessions. 4 hours for Clara's love, if it had ever been love, to reveal itself as something far more ruthless. When the final moment came, they were led from their rooms at the same time, crossing paths in the hallway. Daniel's eyes were swollen with tears, his body sagging with the weight of everything spilled. Clara's gaze locked on his, cold and steady, not a flicker of regret. No words passed between them. None were needed. The pact that had once bound them in blood shattered in silence, and the nation, watching, would never forget the couple who proved how love and cruelty could become indistinguishable.